Hello and welcome back to another great video for ICMI 2021. I'm joined by Vernon and we have Melissa McFadden and Lori DeBolt, both of NCFM False Accusation Chapter. How are you both doing?
I'm doing well. Tired. There's a lot of work involved, but doing well. Thank you. And thanks for having us.
Doing great. Glad to be here.
So this is a question to the both of you. Looking at ICMI videos, I mean, you talked about the case of your son who was falsely accused of rape. Can you just give us a brief introduction to that?
I have to be very careful with the words and pieces of the story that I use because of ongoing cases, right? So my son was, I want to say 23 and at a summer barbecue, right? And the normal courting, mating occurred. And later there was consensual sex. However, it was reported as sexual assault. Basically, he's in prison right now. We're going through the appeal process. There's so many things that went wrong in this trial, so many things, both on the judge's part, the prosecutor's part, the accuser's part, even our own attorneys that we hired. It was pretty traumatic. The day that he was convicted is the day I crumbled, I crashed. I couldn't hold myself up anymore. And so the next day, because I'm not one to keep down for long, I'll crash, but I'll get back up. The next day, I did a lot of research and trying to find out who can I reach out to, who can help, who can understand, who can listen, who's going to believe me. And so when I went through the internet and Googled false accusations, right, I came up with, it's rare. It never happens, right? It's 1% to 2%. I was devastated until I found National Coalition for Men. And that organization has just changed my world. We're still in the appeal process, so that was just filed. And we probably won't get any results back for another 4 to 5 months. Meanwhile, my son is sitting in prison. He's been in there for almost 2 years now. His life is just completely put on hold. So that's the experience that brought me to National Coalition for Men.
And Melissa?
My son is currently 25, and when he was 20, he was home from college on summer break. And he was doing some odd jobs around the house, trying to find a summer job. But in the meantime, just helping out some neighbors that he knew. And so he went to a friend of the family home to watch her son. And he actually brought his little brother with him. He had never done that before, but he brought his 5-year-old brother with him. And while he was there, this woman who happens to be my age, she had been drinking wine and she was becoming intoxicated, and he wanted to move his day along. And so he said, can we go ahead and go? Do you mind if we collect the money and for the babysitting and my brother and I leave? And she said, yeah, okay, just a minute. And then she would sit back down in her chair. And so eventually my son, Tony, said, are you okay? Would you like to go talk? And they went to her bedroom. And this was, although he's known her since he was in 8th grade, they had never engaged in any kind of physical relationship, but they went and they had consensual sex. And remember, her son and my son were both in the house at the time, which was a poor decision on his part, but they had consensual sex. And she implied that she wanted to have a relationship with him. And he said, this is a one-time thing. In fact, it didn't really even happen. So, this is not a relationship. And so he was not nice. He was very unkind. And her feeling, she seemed to be rather okay that evening. In fact, I texted her that night and she communicated with me just fine. And a few days later, she contacted me and said, I need to speak with you. Please come over. So I did. And at that point, she told me that he had raped her. She said, please don't talk to your son about this. And of course, I did. He's my son. And so I came home and I asked him what had happened. And he was very upset that I would even ask that question. I said, of course, that's not what happened. We had sex and I shouldn't have done it, but it was consensual. And we didn't hear anything else about it for about a month and a half. And then we received a postcard in the mail from the bondsman and thought, what the heck is this? I've never seen anything like this. This must be a mistake or a joke. We had no idea. So I went to the Missouri website where you can see if there's active cases. And sure enough, there was an active case. And that's how we found out that there was a warrant for his arrest. And we contacted an attorney who was very ill-equipped to handle a case like this. We had never experienced anything like this, of course, and didn't know what we were doing. So we hired someone who was not qualified. By Tuesday, this was Friday when we received the postcard, and on Tuesday, he was arrested and he hasn't seen the outside world since. He was provided a $100,000 cash only bond, which we tried to appeal and they wouldn't budge on that. She continued to go to court when we would do these bond reduction hearings and say how scared she was of him and he was a danger. I just wanted my son to go back to school and finish his education. And that was obviously not allowed. And so he was kept in jail for about 15 months before trial. And he was found guilty and sentenced to 15 years. He's currently in a maximum security prison in the state of Missouri. And he appealed once. And then he declined to file the next appeal because he said that the truth will come out and there's no need to continue with this process, that his faith was big enough that God was going to make sure that the right thing happened. And unfortunately, nothing has happened.
Both of you mentioned ill-equipped attorneys. Like when these things happened, you didn't have anyone really specializing in this field to kind of turn to. But would you say that in the present day, there are increasing number of attorneys that are in fact experienced and equipped to handle these things, now that we're bringing attention to them?
I would say that the qualified attorneys are available, but I would also say that they are usually quite pricey. We spent $40,000 that we didn't have and didn't receive the outcome that we were looking for. And I regret that. I wish that we had actually gone with a public defender, because the public defender that we used for the appeal process was phenomenal.
I agree. When I went to look for an attorney, I thought I did enough research, right? So I looked at one and I saw their website, looked really cool. Don't ever judge an attorney by their website. And so I also saw a recent case that they handled where sexual assault charges were filed and they were able to solve it to a lesser charge, right? So I figured, okay, if they can do that, then they can certainly help with my son. Totally a big waste of $50,000. I mean, I thought I had it, but they're a two-team, husband and a wife. And for 2 years, the husband kept going into court and continuing everything. Nothing was filed, nothing was done, right? The day the trial started, we had no preparation. Now, keep in mind, I've never had experience in any of this, but nothing was done. And in fact, any research that was done were things that I had found, right? We had some witnesses on our list and I was trying to reach out to them to get information, to find the details. I was searching the internet, I was searching everything. And so they did nothing. I also found a case, and again, I have to be very careful with what I say, all right, because there's another issue going on that I need to be pretty mums on the words. So there was another case that I found that would have provided motive, and our attorneys failed to thoroughly investigate that and bring it in as motive. So I'm like, okay, well, now the appeal attorney that we have has looked at that and can understand why it was not allowed in. So there's quite a few things that we're appealing. To keep it short, who knows? No one ever goes through this with experience, right? You just, okay, pick an attorney, you got some good recommendations, you go for it, and then you lose. There's a lot of advice. I mean, research. We definitely should have researched not only the cases that they've handled, but their credibility, their other references. What are they doing? Like the attorney that we have now doing our appeal is actually teaching at a university. I thought, okay, that's an added benefit, right? But if you don't know, what do? You just panic and go for the heartstrings and, think you're doing the right thing.
The extent of my research was asking a friend who knew some attorneys. That was it. That's all I did. And so it's my naivete saying, you must be good because he's recommended.
Yeah.
And this is going to be no big deal. And it's going to blow over and we'll be fine.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is just, I mean, I knew this going into it, but just hearing it again, it's just so overwhelming that this can be like this. And we'll talk about that more in just a bit, but I kind of want to take a step back and ask you about who you were before all of this started. And more specifically, if someone told you that their son was going through this exact problem, how might you have looked at that situation compared to what you are now looking at? Now that you know the bigger picture, you were very much in the dark about it, as you admit. So what did you think about these kind of things that were happening in the world?
I'm a mom. I have 4 children. Tony is my oldest. I am a social worker. And so with being a social worker, I do often give people the benefit of the doubt, and I expect that everyone has the ability to change. But I also live a very middle-class, comfortable life and have never experienced any interaction with the law. So I trusted the law. I trusted the judicial system. And I had heard that you don't believe everything you see on TV, but if you see someone's very scary picture on the news, well, certainly he must be guilty of something. And boy, have I learned a lot. If I had heard a friend or a family member talk about the exact same situation, I'm not sure that I could have been the friend or family member that my friends and family have been to me. I have a private Facebook group that is a group of supporters of Tony, and there's hundreds of people in that group. Many of them are his high school friends, and the rest are my friends and my family. I don't know that I would have just believed that someone was innocent, and these people believe 100% that he is an innocent person that's been caught in this very horrible disaster. So now I try not to judge situations or others. And someone that is on the sex offense registry is no longer that scary person that I once believed them to be.
Yeah, Melissa, yeah, I no longer look at them as scary people at all, right? In the 80s, I was feminist. And I don't want to go into that because that was a part of my life where it screwed up my future. Totally. I mean, I looked at marriage as I have to protect myself. So not if there's a divorce, but when there's a divorce, I will be ready to go on my own and, do everything on my own, right? Support kids, do whatever. I ended up unintentionally hurting our relationship. My son's father. I unintentionally hurt him. We ended up getting a divorce and he committed suicide like 3 years after. But who I was after high school, I lost track of feminism and what they were trying to do. I didn't pay attention to it. And I think I went through this personal transformation with God that I need to look, especially after my ex-husband committed suicide, I have to look at people and look at the goodness in them. And I'm not always perfect, and I need to change myself for the better too. So I always felt deep conviction for equality and justice. And as I grew older, it was more for men and women, right? Not just women. Back then, if you read it in the newspaper, so-and-so charged with sexual assault, I didn't really see a lot of that. Number one, I didn't really pay attention to it. But my thoughts were, okay, well, let's wait until the trial comes along, right? I've always been, due process. And when they were convicted, right? You hear the sentencing, you read the sentencing in the newspaper and stuff. Facebook now, right? Internet, social media. Then is when I felt, oh, well, he must have done it, right? He absolutely must have done it. A jury of 12 convicted him. A bench trial convicted him. The day they convicted my son, I'm going to try not to cry. I still get emotional over this. I no longer see anyone guilty in the newspaper. I no longer believe if they've been convicted that they were actually guilty. I have totally lost 100% faith. There's absolutely no faith in our justice system anymore. It's like going to church on Sunday and realizing that God is not real. That is just a huge blow in the face. If somebody were to talk to me back then, I'm just that type of person, and I still am, that I would have listened and I would have sorted out, okay, tell me what happened. What are the facts? So on and so forth. So, but now more than ever, I do not believe that just because you're convicted that you're guilty, because of my son and Tony's life and everyone else's.
So this next question is more geared towards Melissa, but I'd like to hear Lori, if you had any input to this. So Melissa, you're the founder of Reset Missouri, correct?
I am.
Right. It's my understanding that it provides transitional housing for men who are returning from prison after being added on the sex offense registry. How difficult was it to do this? I mean, it doesn't sound like anything that anybody wants to give any kind of support, because they automatically think that we're talking about all rightly accused and continue to be punished even outside of prison. So can I get your thoughts on that?
So how difficult was it? So being a mom is really, really hard. 100 times more than that. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. This is so hard. So first, the people that I need to support this, that might have money for funding, don't always want to support something. Criminal justice is a huge thing in the society right now, and people are about criminal justice reform. But when you say that this person has been convicted of a sex crime, they don't want to hear about it anymore. There's definitely a very negative connotation there. So there's that difficulty. The next difficulty is the logistics. So first, we're dealing with a lack of funding. And second, we're dealing with the fact that in most places in the United States, but I can speak about Missouri specifically, there are residency restrictions. That means that wherever we find a home, it cannot be within 1,000 feet of a school or a daycare, and that may be an in-home daycare. It cannot be within 500 feet of a park. If a daycare is built or a school is opened or reopened, the people that are currently residing there can stay, but no one knew. So Reset Missouri is transitional living. They're not meant to stay there forever. The third difficulty is that we are currently able to house 10 people, and by October, about 15. And that is a drop in the ocean. The need for these services is so immense. We get requests for residency and applications daily. It's very overwhelming. The need is overwhelming. The more that I work with these guys personally, I mentioned that the people on the register are no longer scary. They're really not. I love these guys. I would pretty much do whatever they need me to do because they are really decent human beings that made a mistake. And all of these men have not been falsely accused. The ones that we are currently housing, they fully admit that they made a mistake. They committed a crime, but that doesn't define who they are. It's really, really hard. But it doesn't matter because, like Lori, it was going to push me on my butt for a day. The next day, I'm getting myself back up. I don't know if that's my German heritage or what it is, but I am going to pick myself up by my bootstraps and get to work because there's no time for wallowing in self-pity.
Yeah, I agree. I agree, Melissa. I mean, to sit there, that would drive me nuts, not to be able to do anything at all. And all the work that you're doing, I know that's difficult. Just listening to other people in our group talk about yeah, my whole screen just went blank. So but anyway, yeah, it is a lot of work, Melissa. And, you know, like I said, like you said, you can't sit on your butt and do nothing because I think you and I are the type of people that it would drive me nuts to bury myself in the bed and do nothing, you know, and I'm sure there's a lot of moms and dads and people out there that are doing the same thing, you know, and I think everyone goes through a process of dealing with this, but eventually, you know, we get back up with help and hope from groups and everything. And that suitable housing, that is such a killer. I've talked with several people trying to get help to find a place. Now, they're not from Missouri, they weren't near your area, but their men were being held in prison past their release date, several months past their release date, because they couldn't find suitable housing. And that to me is just inhumane. It's horrible to know that, hey, I'm free, but I'm still stuck behind these bars and I can't be with my family. I can't do my life. It's a lot of work, Melissa.
I want to ask a little bit more about false accusation specifically, more in a general subject. I want to start with you, Lori, although it was Melissa who kind of brought this up about alcohol. And the going narrative now is that when a woman has anything to drink, she's unable to consent. But the funny part is whether a man drinks or not, he completely has the agency to give consent. So what is your view on that? Do you agree with that? Do neither man or woman able to give consent, or can they both give consent while still under the influence?
My firm thought on that is they are both able to give consent unless she is just laying on the ground, not moving. That's a different issue. But if she's walking and talking and he's walking and talking and he's observing her in his alcohol stage of drinking, whatever level he's at, and she's doing the same, and they have sex, that's consensual, right? I do not like the idea where men are held responsible to determine if she's drunk or not. Do you know what I mean? They're both consenting. They're both consenting. I get really ticked off on that. That was an issue that was raised during my son's trial. And the prosecutor, again, I had to be careful with the words I use. The prosecutor asked my son, did you ask her if she wanted to have sex? And so my son looked at him and said, is that what we're supposed to do nowadays? Now, he didn't say this, but I mean, are we literally supposed to say, do you want to have sex with me? Yes or no? You know? So Kevin was responding like the normal mating type things that you do, you know, the looks, the movements, the speech, the getting closer. And, you know, those are the signals that are saying, I want to have sex with you. Right. And so if she's doing that and she's drunk, she's consenting. Right. Same thing for the man. So this works both ways.
There are cases where women are knocked out and unable to do anything with their brain, and so unable essentially to consent to anything. Absolutely, that's true. Men also have been in vulnerable positions like that. It also depends on who the person is and the extent of the drinking, I think it does play a role. And you're right. If it's been said that a woman has been drinking, then automatically she's not consenting. If I drink a bottle of wine, I won't be able to function for days. Unfortunately, or whatever. That is not the case with Tony's accuser. Her best friends had gone to trial and were very willing to testify on Tony's behalf against their ex-best friend, and namely about her drinking and her decision-making, essentially. She has gotten DUI before. She had the police come to her house because she was incapable of caring for her child because she was intoxicated. So in that way, yeah, she probably was too intoxicated when the police showed up to properly care for herself or her child. That's not the day that my son was there. She makes poor decisions. And she made a decision that day that she knew what she was doing. And I am comfortable and confident saying that because she remembers the entire encounter. If she was blackout drunk, then that's on him. But she wasn't.
So to follow up on Lori's point about the signals of consent, she's talked about, why do we have to use all these words every step of the way? So following up on that notion, let's assume that we can't stop relations between men and women from happening in day-to-day life. And so my question is, short of enforcing absolute celibacy, how can we advise men, especially young men, to ensure these false accusations don't happen?
I have a humorous first answer is record the whole darn thing, but then there's porn charges there. I'm sorry. Goodness,
That's a good answer though, honestly.
This is certainly different from what I was growing up with. I am not an angel. And I think we've all been there. I mean, it's unfortunate. We have to stop having sex with those that we don't know well. And I think that'd be my first advice, especially for college kids heading off to college. And we know how that goes for our men, for our boys. Those parties are tempting, right? Very tempting. And alcohol kind of relaxes you, puts you in the mood, you're getting into the spirit of things, you're feeling grown up, and going and having sex will cost you your education. So I recommend that, and this is so hard to say, it's like, don't have sex until you know the person very well. Ask her about her past, have an argument or two, figure out how she has an argument. And just hold off on sex. And I know there are going to be times when it just happens. Yeah, this is horrible. Like, still, what do you want to do? Record it? You want to have someone standing there witnessing everything, one for her, one for him. It's a crazy day where our men and boys get falsely accused and convicted so easily.
I think actually it would be very helpful to have a recorded statement from the other party, male or female, that says, yes, I consent. It takes the fun out of this, impromptu encounter, but it saves his life.
Yeah, I agree. So after high school graduation, we should pass out survivor kits to all of our men. Here, welcome to the world. This is what's going to happen. Prepare for it and protect yourself. Yeah.
Those are very good points, but unfortunately, this is just not an easy question to answer. I don't think there is any right answers. But to your point, Melissa, what you're saying, that at least record the consent happening where they agree to it, women could just simply argue, well, I felt coerced to say it. So it's no easy.
100%.
Yeah, or they
right.
could even, after they could claim, well, I told them to stop, right? Or I didn't like that. I told them to stop. So yeah, you're right. I don't think there is a right answer for this, but there's so many things to consider.
something that happens a lot in these kind of cases is you're not allowed to bring up the sexual history of the accuser because that could be prejudicial to the jury. However, we can bring in character witnesses to define what the accused is like. Do you think that this is a double standard, that we can't look at her past, but we can look at his past?
Well, I would like to answer that question. We had, as I said, two of her best friends that wanted to come and testify, and they were not allowed because it would be, I forget what they called it, but it would be against her character and how they presented her. She's a teacher and she's an upstanding pillar of the community. And so to bring someone in to test that theory was not allowed. We were allowed to bring in also people for my son, but my attorneys didn't call them as witnesses. So we could have had character witnesses on his behalf that were not also going to talk negatively about her character, but it didn't happen. I think that no one wants their character to be judged or destroyed, but if you're going to do it for one, you certainly should do it for the other. And if you're not going to do it for one, you cannot do it for the other, and it should be fair.
Yeah, I agree. The rape shield law had good intentions in the beginning. I think the rape shield in keeping out the past, I agree to some extent, right? If that past has anything to do with the case at hand, then it must be brought in if it's very relevant to the case. Now, our judge refused to bring any of that in, right? And our attorneys were not very effective. There was a solid reason to bring that in. If the reputation is that she made previous false accusations, then yes, the attorney should fight to bring that in. That's very relevant. If the previous history is that she is a dancer in a bar, okay, so big deal. That should be kept out. That's her job, right? That does not mean anything else but that.
We got time for one more question, which I'm going to field this. Now, I've done a lot of study in this, especially false rape. I do research on a lot of different issues. But one thing that I've come across and is also featured on the NCFM page for false accusation is the rate of false accusation. Now, there have been several studies that have come out with a variety of figures, and there's no one real consensus on what the actual number is. And we may never actually know what the actual number is. So beyond that, what is your impression of the rate of false accusations doing the work that you've done? And we'll start with you, Lori.
It is extremely higher than the 2 to 8% that people are saying and trying to pass as fact. The 2 to 8% is not fact. That was just an opinion. That was just an assumption and not scientifically proven. That's the narrative, is to keep the false accusation statistics low to help the women's movement groups capitalize on that, right? I would go so far as to say it's probably even higher than 60%. How many people can afford $50,000 for an attorney? They just can't. So they go with a public defender. And how many caseloads can a public defender take, right? So they're convicted, right? Some of those could be false accusations. Yeah, this gets under my skin. Even one falsely accused person is one too many in my book. Having my son in prison for a crime he didn't do, and we have the facts, we have everything, we know what was withheld as evidence. And so they take that conviction as true rape, right? But to me, it's false accusation. How many men are we getting in prison that are being exonerated now today because of DNA evidence, right? Those are false accusations that are yet to be counted in everything that we've got. So I get boiled up when I hear this 2 to 8%. I get extremely frustrated at those who get grant money to put on education courses for law enforcement officers using that same 2 to 8%. It's much higher. It's extremely higher. And I don't think anyone has the exact answer to what that is right now, because there's so many in prison. Who has time to look at all those cases and review? Right? But there's so many in prison that I believe are falsely accused.
I don't know what the rate is. I do have a book that one of the things I wanted to do when this was happening was I wanted to write a book. I knew I couldn't sit down and write an entire book. I don't have the drive to do that, but I did compile an anthology, and there are 12 stories of people who were falsely accused. That was a very easy number to achieve because I put a Facebook post out there and said, if you have a story that you want to tell about, contact me. And within 2 weeks, I had a lot of people, more than 12 people, contact me saying that they wanted to write their story. The other thing I want to mention is that when I would tell people, I was never ashamed or afraid to tell people that I knew what had happened, my son was accused of. And every other person, I would say, said to me, oh, that happened to fill in the blank, cousin, father-in-law, brother. They knew someone else that had been falsely accused. It happens a lot. Do I know if it's 8%? Even 8 out of 100 people is way too many. It should never happen. Is it 70%? I don't know. I don't know what the statistics are. I just know it should never happen. One, because our children, our loved ones are the victims then, and their lives are taken from them. And two, there are people who are sexually assaulted, and the resources are then diverted from them investigating and trying to, the prosecutors don't really care about the facts, they care about the win. And so they divest all of that energy into getting that win because the case has fallen on their desk. What about that person, male or female, that was sexually assaulted and is getting no resources because they're spending that energy on Lori's son, on my son? I don't know what the statistics are, but it's too many.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree, Melissa. Just talking to a girlfriend that I grew up with, she moved to Wisconsin and her son was accused, right? She has a friend whose son was accused. And as the commercial goes, and so on, and so on, and so on. It's heartbreaking.
Well, this has been a very powerful video. All the videos are powerful, but this is, you do know your stuff. And unfortunately, it came because you were forced into the situation. You were forced to go out there and find out about it. And I appreciate that the both of you are here, that you're such powerful forces, but I wish you came into it under different circumstances. I hate that this has happened to your sons. But I thank you for coming out today for ICMI. Is there any final thoughts you want to say before we close?
Yes, I truly wish I had my eyes wide open long before it happened to my son. So many regrets, so many heavy, a lot of heavy guilt. But I just want to let everyone know that you're not alone. You are totally not alone. NCFM.org, definitely a great organization. You can join our Wednesday night meetings for the Women Against False Accusations. We're there to support each other. People need to know that they're not alone. People need to be able to bond with others that are going through the exact same thing. We also very, very open to actively raising awareness and changing the bias against our men, changing the laws that are biasing our men. I wouldn't have made it without Melissa and NCFM. I would not have. It's given me a lot of power and a lot of hope and a lot of piss and vinegar. I want to raise awareness that this is happening all across the USA. It could happen to anyone, your son, your brother, your father, your uncle. I never thought about this. So we're here and it's sad. And I appreciate you, Chris and Vernon, for allowing us to share this. Thank you.
Well, now it's going to sound like I'm just saying this because Lori said it, but I intended to say that it was vitally important to find Lori and to find others who I can communicate with that just understood, that just got it. It's so important to know that you are not alone, whether you're a loved one or the accused. It's a horrible situation to go through. No one should do it alone. If you have any inclination to do so, resetmissouri.org could really use your support. And we don't have, this organization is being run by myself and another mother with donations. We have no grant funding yet. And so we really can use lots of support. Thank you so much for having us.
Well, you are very welcome. And thank you for coming out. And I hope everyone has a good night. And we're going to close it from here.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you both.
All right.